What draws Western audiences to anime? Is it the greater diversity of storytelling that you just can't get in Western media? Or is it the rigorous online debates over who is best girl? For myself, I got into anime because of its tendency to provoke a philosophical mindset. I mean, sure, there's plenty that don't, but compared to Western animation, the difference is virtually night and day. It almost seems like a requirement for a lot of anime that they brood on the deepest, unsolvable mysteries of the human condition. Yet, I had missed out on the delightfully daring and challenging philosophical content that the medium was capable of for most of my life. Though I had watched thought-provoking anime like Ghost in the Shell early on in life, it wasn't until 2021 that I started to embrace the medium enthusiastically, thanks to recommendations from my amazing wife. For the past 3 years, she has helped guide me to all the most novel, philosophical ideas that the medium was capable of. Now, I feel the time has come where I could reflect on all the anime I have watched and competently determine which ones have had the most enlightening effects. I want to determine which anime did the best at drawing upon pre-existing philosophical material and then inspired fans like me to seek out the greatest human minds that ever lived. So, I put together a top 10 list of anime that I believe contain both the most philosophical content and also do the most to birth one's inner philosopher. Before I do that, I want to introduce you to a simple tool that will help quantify the philosophical content in each anime. It's a tool that my friend Arcane suggested I use when I did my top 10 most philosophical games list. With each anime, we will measure it against 4 categories of philosophy and give each of them a 0 out of 5 score. Both his and my score for each anime will be put in the bottom right corner of the screen at the beginning of each entry. Finally, I have 6 honorable mentions: Pluto, Code Geass, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Paranoia Agent, and Cowboy Bebop. As for the 6th honorable mention, I will reveal it in just a few seconds, but I want to keep it a secret until after I reveal my number 10 entry.
We're gonna hate it, aren't we?
It's
an anime that should be on the list, but it's not, and we should just click off now.
These are the top 10 most philosophical anime. Number 10, Technolize. In my experience, anybody who knows anything about this anime tends to also be aware of the creator, as well as his other more famous and more beloved anime, Serial Experiments Lain, which is, you guessed it, the final honorable mention. Would you just hear me out for 10 seconds? Literally 10 seconds. If you had any doubt that I was trying to be as objective as I could about this list, know that Serial Experiments Lain is probably in my top 10 favorite anime of all time, and is in almost every conceivable way superior to Technolize. But note that this isn't a list about overall quality, but rather the quality and quantity of its philosophy. Based on that alone, I must give Technolize the slight edge. Why? Just like Serial Experiments Lain, Technolize deals with a lot of the same philosophical questions regarding the ethics of human augmentation. Specifically, is it possible, nay, is it desirable, to augment a human being to the point that their bodies and minds become inseparable from that of a god? With both series, they come to the same conclusion that no, it is not desirable. But where Technolize differs from its brethren is that it takes that conclusion and tests it in the most brutal of ways. Set in a post-apocalyptic future in the underground city of Lux, Technolize follows a character named Ichise, a prize fighter who recently suffered the loss of both his arm and leg. A character named Doc takes pity on him and decides to replace his arm and leg via an augmentation process called technolization. Via his connection to Doc, Ichise gets tangled up with various radical political groups vying for control over Lux. It is up to Ichise and whatever comrades he can muster to try and stop things from getting out of control. But as things inevitably do get out of control, the temptation to escape it all through augmentation surmounts. Beyond this synopsis, I can't say much without spoiling the series. All I can say is that the city of Lux and the brutality of living there tests that aforementioned belief. that one should not augment the body and mind to such an extent that they can escape the pain of living. It tests it so much that it renders Techno-Lies, in my opinion, the bleakest story in the history of the medium. Nonetheless, contrasting against that bleakness makes the positive in Techno-Lies shine brighter than it did in Serial Experiments Lane. Though it's a tough watch from beginning to end, it will make those who are able to discern its subtext feel enlightened, like they can encounter the worst life has to offer and emerge unscathed. Number 9. Fullmetal Alchemist series. This is the only cheat on the list, and even then it's only a quasi-cheat. I simply could not choose between the original Fullmetal Alchemist anime and Brotherhood. While I think the original anime is more obvious with its philosophical themes, Brotherhood is less obvious but just as dense in other ways. Starting with Brotherhood, I will go on record and say that the metaphysical philosophy on display in Brotherhood might be the best I have ever seen in any medium, not just anime. Hell, I did an entire 5-part series showing just how deep Brotherhood goes with its symbolism, which is almost entirely accurate to actual alchemical practice and the Hermetic tradition it springs from. Every symbol is used purposefully in order to echo Hermetic philosophy, which is then beautifully interwoven through the anime's various themes, including the tension between faith and science, the importance of mitigating hubris, and how love and friendship truly do conquer all, and not just in a Kingdom Hearts kind of way. Despite that, there are philosophical elements that I believe were superior in the original 2003 anime. It has a much darker tone overall, replacing the metaphysical philosophy of Brotherhood with a heavier emphasis on existentialism. It makes the journey of the main characters to fix their broken bodies after a tragic accident very emotional. Not necessarily more emotional than Brotherhood, but emotional in a different, more painful way. They are constantly trying to find a source of meaning that can sustain them despite the suffering that they have gone through, which becomes increasingly impossible as the anime goes along. This is especially true in their confrontations with the main villain, whose nihilistic philosophy bears a greater degree of sophistication than, let's say, your average Final Fantasy villain. Though ultimately I think that Brotherhood is clearly the superior anime in almost every way, the 2003 anime is still worth your time, and it approaches the level of philosophical quality that is contained in Brotherhood. Number 8. Monster. If you still had any doubt about my attempts to be objective, despite what I said in my number 10 entry, know that Monster is my all-time favorite anime. So again, quality isn't the primary factor here. Though Monster's breadth of philosophy is arguably the lowest of any entry on this list, the few philosophical schools and subjects that are there are explored and exploited in ways that are as brilliant as they are terrifying. In short, the central question that Monster poses its audience is, could the devil exist? Not the mythological being, but a human that bears all the evil traits that a devil would possess. If so, what would the devil's philosophy of evil look like? And how should humanity contend with that evil, if they even can? Monster draws upon the greatest works of literature that explore that same question. Works like Goethe's Faust and Milton's Paradise Lost, which feature the devil or a devil-like character. It then adopts all the common traits shared between those depictions of evil and plants them in the anime's central villain, Johann Liebert. For the series' duration, many characters succumb to the corrosive nature of Johann's nihilistic philosophy, one which seeks to negate life in the most subtle yet efficient ways possible. As these characters get picked off and Johann expertly evades the law, the protagonists that remain who are aware of the depths of Johann's evil become tempted to go outside the law and kill him. Even if it meant they would spend the rest of their lives in jail, it might still be the utilitarian option. it might be better than letting somebody as evil and as cunning as Johann stay alive. Though the anime tempts you to believe this through Johann's vile actions, it slowly but surely offers a positive alternative to Johann's philosophy, as well as alternative methods for understanding and dealing with somebody who is capable of such evil. Best of all, that alternative philosophy is grounded in truths that accentuate the beauty of life and the power of love to conquer all. And again, it's not done in a cheesy Pollyanna-type way. It accurately and honestly portrays the philosophy of evil in all of its power, and then refutes it with a powerful, life-affirming attitude. One that is impossible to not adopt after you watch Monster. That is why it is my all-time favorite anime. Number 7. Steins Gate. Arguably the most unique entry on this list, if only for the fact that it features a time travel device in the form of a cell phone attached to a microwave. No, I'm not kidding. Despite that ridiculousness, Steins Gate is brilliant, and its philosophy, though only one of many parts that make up its brilliance, is something that I have no problem describing as groundbreaking. Steins Gate contends with the ethics of time travel by grounding it in the complex and sometimes obtuse philosophy of Martin Heidegger. To put it as simply as I can, Heidegger believed that human beings were quote-unquote time-haunted. By that, he meant that human action is motivated by the knowledge of our impending deaths, and in his opinion, the best way to live in the face of that knowledge is to develop the best forms of care, for oneself and for others. Now what Steins Gate does is take Heidegger's belief and sees how it would apply if one could send their consciousness back in time. That way, one could theoretically live forever. One wouldn't have to deal with the grief that comes with losing a loved one. In other words, one wouldn't have to be time-haunted. Yet, is this so desirable? Is avoiding the realities of death the proper way to care for one's own mental health? Does the lack of an ability to die lessen the specialness of a person, or your relationship to them? After all, something isn't necessarily beautiful because it lasts forever. There are other ways that the ethics of time travel and proper care are explored, along with some brilliant reinventions of the classic fate versus free will debate. But I can't go into those without spoiling key plot points. I hope that what I have said, though, motivates you to check it out so you too can share in the joy of this timeless anime. Shout out to the Masked Man. Number 6. Babylon. I'm sure this is probably going to be the most controversial pick on this list. This is because there are a lot of people that don't like this anime, and I can understand why. The primary reason being that the first half has one of the most intriguing yet disturbing premises in not just anime, but I would argue any form of media. But in the second half, it rushes to the end, forgetting all the character arcs and political drama that made the first half so good. Though I have a lot of sympathy for that perspective, Babylon still makes the list because its premise instills such a strong philosophical mindset, in part because the first half is so good. In Babylon, a new city in Japan is being built where experimental legislation can be passed. One of the first pieces of experimental legislation is one that would allow anybody who wishes to take their own lives to do so, regardless of the reason. Though the notion would likely seem repulsive to most people, and it does at first to everybody in Babylon, the anime gradually shows how easily people can use exceptions to general rules, especially people with nefarious motivations, to manipulate the general populace. For instance, though self-termination is bad, what if one could take their own life in order to give a life-sustaining organ to a loved one? It's exceptions like that, which, though somewhat uncontroversial on their own, are used by people pushing the legislation to instill doubt in the minds of voters. Enough doubt so they can foster their evil end goal. I won't say what that goal is, but I will say that the philosophy of the mastermind behind it is very similar to Johann Liebert from the aforementioned Monster. In order to fight against this trend towards death, the anime's protagonists must concoct the most rigorous arguments they can, and in turn, it becomes impossible for the viewer to not want to do the same. Number 5. Death Note. What if you had a magic book that would allow you to kill anybody you would want to, and all you had to do was write down the name of that person inside that book? In any other circumstance, such a premise would come off as immensely silly, but Death Note manages to turn it into something that is delightfully cerebral. Of its many cerebral elements, the most relevant is the anime's ongoing discussion surrounding the nature of justice. In the mind of the anime's main character, Light Yagami, justice is the promise of death to anybody who would commit any sort of crime. If the end he seeks is a world devoid of crime, and the evil that motivates it, then any means of achieving that end are justified. The anime offers up arguments both in favor and against this approach. Though Light's actions do bring the rate of crime down worldwide, and in turn makes the world a better place for moral, honest people, the lack of mercy as a balance to Light's form of justice is unnerving. Like, I think most people would say that Light's choice to kill non-violent offenders like thieves is not appropriate. The same can be said when he killed the innocent FBI agents who were trying to catch him. But these are just my arguments. At no point does the anime take a concrete moral position against Light. This is especially true for the characters L, M, and N, and the authorities they work with in order to try and catch Light. They often seem less concerned with justice and more concerned with winning. Thus, the audience must draw from the various arguments for and against Light's methods in order to determine for themselves what true justice is. Death Note has perpetuated this philosophical debate with a non-stop fervency for the last 2 decades, and for that reason alone, it belongs on this list. Number 4. Ghost in the Shell. Standalone complex. I mean, duh, it's Ghost in the Shell. Number 3. Okay, fine, a bit of analysis. While most forms of sci-fi speculate on the way that future technologies will impact our current ways of life, the Ghost in the Shell franchise, and especially Standalone Complex, fosters its own unique identity by trying to be as complex as possible. I swear to God that wasn't meant to be a pun. So much so that, I would argue, it sometimes becomes too complex for its own good. Though I would argue that this is more of an issue for the second season rather than the first. But if you can keep up with it, which you should be able to do the majority of the time, you will find a series that continuously innovates on the classic sci-fi formula, creating stories that will still be relevant in the next 50 years due to their socio-political intrigue and, of course, the philosophical questions they provoke. For instance, what if a piece of technology could plant little cameras in your eyes, and the recordings they capture could then be used against you or other people by police? What sort of privacy protections would need to be put in place, if the powers that be would even allow that sort of thing? How about in Season 1, Episode 11, where certain children who have had their brains augmented suddenly become incapable of any kind of socialization? How do we rehabilitate these children, and more importantly, how do we shield them from those who would take advantage of their vulnerable state? Again, while the conflicts between technology and humanity is obviously familiar to sci-fi, Ghost in the Shell consistently finds new and entertaining ways to present them, all with the singular goal of fostering the viewer's capacity for individual thought, of fostering their own standalone complex. That's literally what the title means. It's not me making a pun. Okay, it's a little bit me making a pun. Number 3, Psycho-Pass. Strictly the first season. Let's make that clear real quick. Seriously, the drop-off in quality that was Season 2 of Psycho-Pass makes Season 2 of The Promise to Neverland look more like a Picasso instead of the toddler's finger painting that it is. That said, Season 1 of Psycho-Pass is so unbelievably amazing that it easily merits the 3rd spot on this list. Though it takes some familiar cues from classic sci-fi like Brave New World, Minority Report, and Ready Player One, it mixes all of them together into an innovative philosophical tale that is as brilliant as it is terrifyingly timely. In the world of Psycho-Pass, not only has artificial intelligence been perfected, it has birthed something that one might reasonably call a god, one known as the Sybil system. It is an AI that has virtually solved all of humanity's biggest problems. There is no more starvation, everybody has a job, crime is virtually non-existent, and mental health care is universal. It seems like the dream of heaven on earth has been realized. What nobody seems to ask, though, is how the Sybil system works. The answer to that question is what unravels the quote-unquote paradise that Sybil has gifted humanity. Now, unfortunately, I can't explain why this is, nor can I explain much of what makes the anime so philosophical without spoiling key plot points. The most that I can say is that no form of artificial intelligence can perfectly address the infinite extent of human irrationality. Where the depths of Psycho-Pass's philosophical inquiry lie are in determining to what extent technology should be used to corral human irrationality in order to make a better world, and to what extent it shouldn't. That is where this anime's genius lies. Number 2. Kino's Journey. Though I don't believe it reaches the philosophical depths of the aforementioned Psycho-Pass, Ghost in the Shell, or my number 1 entry, Kino's Journey surpasses every anime on this list in terms of philosophical quantity, accessibility, and doing the most to birth one's inner philosopher. The anime follows Kino, a 15-year-old girl, as she goes on a never-ending journey across multiple countries. She is spurred on this journey due to a tragic event from her past, one that made her question everything she thought she knew about the world. In order to rectify this trauma, she visits as many countries as she can and engages with their cultures. In doing this, she will take the best elements from each culture and, ideally, adopt a new value system for herself. As I noted in my video dedicated to this anime, Kino seems to be doing this in order to embody the Nietzschean idea of the free spirit, somebody who holds no attachment to any established set of values, any pre-established conception of good and evil. Rather, in the Nietzschean fashion, she seeks a value system beyond good and evil, which is predicated by her one and only attachment, the pursuit of truth. By seeing the world through Kino's eyes, the audience is slowly taught to adopt her ethic in a couple of genius ways. The formula goes something like this. Kino visits a country and witnesses a custom that the average person would either find appealing or appalling on first glance. Then, Kino learns something about why that custom exists, which tends to flip that initial knee-jerk reaction on its head. At no point does Kino offer a value judgment of her own in order to encourage the audience to feel one way. She almost always maintains an air of ambivalence. Thus, the audience are always forced to come to their own conclusions. In doing this, they will ideally become their own free spirit. Very few works of fiction do as much to nurture one's philosophical side as Kino's Journey. It's even rarer to see one do it in a way that appeals to every type of philosopher, from scholars to newcomers. It's a masterpiece of the genre, one that I can totally understand taking the #1 spot on other people's lists. Yet, there is one that, in my opinion, just barely gets ahead of it purely based on depth. Number 1. Ergo Proxy. Watching Ergo Proxy is like meditation. There's a way to do it correctly and incorrectly. If you do it incorrectly, you'll just be sitting there taking up space and precious oxygen. But if you do it correctly, you will supposedly achieve levels of consciousness you never thought possible. I went through a similar experience when I first tried to meditate and when I first tried to watch Ergo Proxy. In both cases, I found it extremely boring, so much so that I couldn't get past the first few episodes despite trying multiple times. What made my attitude flip, however, was when I stopped trying to impose my will on both. when I stopped expecting a certain result. When I allowed my will to be fully subsumed by the meditative process and Ergoproxy's peculiar narrative style, I discovered, like I said in my video on the anime, an infinitely unfolding kaleidoscope of philosophical splendor. Ergoproxy is a masterfully crafted sci-fi story that draws upon a variety of philosophical and metaphysical traditions, including postmodernism, idealism, and esoteric religions like Gnosticism and alchemy. It draws upon these traditions to try and answer what is probably the most famous and most difficult philosophical question of the last 200 years. In the 19th century, the aforementioned Nietzsche made the famous proclamation that God was dead and we had killed him. This was due to the advent of science and Enlightenment philosophy, which Nietzsche believed had thoroughly discredited God's existence. Though some people view Nietzsche's proclamation as something positive, in reality, Nietzsche thought all hell would break loose. After all, Western morality had been predicated on the notion that there was some transcendent meaning to acting morally in this life. If that's removed, what is to stop some people from becoming nihilistic and resentful to the point of violence when life becomes too hard? The authors of Ergoproxy, as well as the characters they write, barrage that question by shooting every possible answer they can give at it, all of which are based on those aforementioned philosophical and religious traditions. They do this out of a sort of desperation, to avoid the pain and resentment that can come from suffering in a godless universe, which one can only surmise to be the case in Ergoproxy's post-apocalyptic landscape. I will say, thankfully, that reliable answers are found, ones that the characters discover and ones that the viewer will discover through their own subjective viewing experience. And the answers received are enough to put Ergoproxy at the top of the list. If you want to learn more about what some of those answers are, make sure to check out my video on Ergoproxy, which I will link in the description box below. Make sure to hit the like button if you liked this video, make sure to leave a comment if you agree or disagree with any of my picks, or if there's an anime I completely forgot to include. Just please keep it civil. We're all anime fans here. Until my next video, remember as always and as per usual, stay yellow.